Good afternoon. I retitled this, hope that works for you. I'm going to cover quickly three things. First one is not really my expertise, so we'll move very quickly through there. I'm very conscious that in the kind of tech world, there's two poles of how does law deal with the extraordinary complexity and vibrancy of activity going on. And one is the Zuckerberg move fast and break things, don't ask permission, ask forgiveness. But as Sarah Darakin said in one of the earlier sessions, healthcare breaks everything. Right? So there I think he was talking about the challenges it poses for building systems. But of course, what is at stake in healthcare is so important. You can't afford to break much. You'll lose trust far too quickly in the systems. The other thing that came up before lunch was around blockers, where Jordi Piera was talking about the enemies outside the room. And that's those who want to stop us being able to use the data in all the amazing ways that we can. And I'm here, I'm a lawyer. I'm not here to stop you using the data, but there are efforts to organize and restrict, which can be very constraining. And I think what we need to find is a middle way through. There's a senior policy guy at Cisco who I love, came up with the notion of red light lawyers and green light lawyers. The red light lawyers love to be there to say stop. And the green light lawyers are, okay, let's find a way to make this happen. When Bart asked earlier in the session, how do you deal with the fact that, I forget, was it 80 or was it 90% of physicians that they surveyed are using ChatGPT to photograph the EHR display to inform themselves better? That's a cry for help, as was also mentioned earlier. We need to find solutions, and what is the way to do that in a way that's responsible, right? So this is what the key thing is, and is in many things. A lot of the secret is in consulting with the stakeholders, and so I'm going to talk quite a bit about what that means in terms of risk-based regulation. So let me move on to talking a bit about what AI laws are you going to need to navigate as you develop your systems. A lot of the legislation that's been introduced has been around medical device approvals by different authorities. China's been very, very active in building out its approval systems for medical devices, software as a medical device. They've been very busy in making sure that a number of applications can function. Other jurisdictions are moving as well at the same time, some slower than others. A lot of that has been in the form of guidelines, which have a quasi-informal kind of nature to them, not necessarily enforceable in full, but then suddenly along comes the European Union's AI law, which is one big blockbuster, huge volume of law, which has very, very serious obligations in it with very high penalties, up to 7% of your total global revenues in some cases, for high-risk systems up to 3% of your global revenues if you violate some of the conformity kind of obligations there. So there's this massive sudden shift in the European Union. Brazil is looking at introducing its own AI law very like this. A number of other countries do as well. Who's it covering? Well, we have providers who create the systems or who commission their creation and are responsible for them, put them on the market in their names, and there's the deployers who actually use them, the hospitals, the clinics. There's a little bit of an open question around whether individual doctors could be viewed as actual deployers. But here are the key kind of players. Then you have importers into the jurisdiction and distributors. It's built on a risk-based approach. So the higher the risk, the heavier the obligations that you need to be thinking about. An awful lot of healthcare software as a medical device and any other uses of AI, an awful lot of that is in the high-risk category. So there's a lot of obligations built into that. So what are we talking about? It does name various types of uses of medical devices, so using for diagnosis, for prevention, monitoring, basically the whole gamut of the potential types of use in day-to-day healthcare. Also, the managing of dispatching of emergency support, and then also eligibility for insurance as well. So these are the kind of the immediately relevant, most relevant high-risk uses of AI that the European Act has identified. And if you are providing these, if you're a provider of these, you have a long list of obligations that you have to follow. Now, if you look at them, you kind of would probably be trying to do these things well if you're a good, responsible company building these systems. You know, it's kind of good governance. But, you know, we're all under pressure, right? So these are anchored in law. You need to make sure that you're managing risk properly, using high-quality data, documenting everything, having a record of performance, being transparent with those who are going to use it about how it works, making sure there's always a human in the loop, and so on. So these are set out. They'll be probably familiar to many of you from basic governance planning, but these are now anchored in the law, and if you don't do them, you face the risk of liability. Then the deployers who are actually using them don't have quite as long a list, but they're pretty responsible, so they need to make sure that they're actually using them as they were, as instructed. You don't go off course, and that you are monitoring the input and the output, and again, you have your human in the loop. Now, it's not like there's this division that once the system is handed over from the provider to the deployer, then there's no more responsibility for the provider. They actually have ongoing obligations to check whether there are malfunctions, things going wrong, where they might need to make updates and so on, and report them sometimes to the authorities in serious cases. So that's the framework in the European Union. August 2026 is the date when these high-risk provisions of the AI Act take force. So you have some time to prepare, but you do need to prepare. Just to add a little context here about what's going on over the other side of the Atlantic, there are a number of rules that were made late in the Biden administration and right at the beginning of the Trump administration around transparency, around non-discrimination, around the life cycle management of products. There was an effort by the Biden administration to really push out better, safer AI under an executive order, which the very first day when Trump came in, he canceled and instead decided to put out his, what did he call it? Did I have it there? Yes, removing barriers to American leadership. So the thrust in the US now is very much less about the kinds of responsibilities that we're talking about in Europe, anchored in law, and much more about letting things loose. Now, the US, as you'll be aware, has a very strong litigious culture, and so there will be ways of holding providers and deployers to account. They might be through professional liability or a number of other kind of legal contractual avenues, but they don't have what we have in Europe. If you recall Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill, that was intended to stop the states individually passing a whole bunch of laws. Normally you do that because the federal government is going to introduce one big law that will cover everybody, but actually here it was really because the tech world had convinced Trump that we just don't want any of this in one big federal law. It'll be too restrictive for us. So that provision was taken out of the One Big Beautiful Bill. And so as a result of that, what you have is a large number of states individually passing laws on AI in health. They're passing laws on AI in other things as well. California's got, I've lost count actually of how many laws relevant to AI California has. For example, Texas is quite active as well. The kinds of themes that we're seeing coming through in these laws are they're much humbler, if you like, or less ambitious than in Europe. They're around, for example, chatbots that if you're booking your appointment with your doctor or even putting your symptoms in and inquiring about what health condition you might have or what treatment might be available, the chatbots must tell you that, hey, I'm a chatbot. Remember, I'm not a doctor. Then also the sort of suicidal cases that we have heard about a lot in the news. If there are any indications of real serious self-harm or suicide, then they have to make referrals to organizations that can help the patient. So that's very much a sort of the retail individual patient-oriented regulation. And the insurance side, the insurance companies can't deny you care just, or prior authorization for care, just on the basis of the algorithm. There must be a human, again, in the loop there. And clinics, when using AI, they've got disclosure obligations, and not a lot more. It's really quite extraordinary how limited the US approach is at this point. So how can you prepare? You know, what do you do to get ready for all of this? Well, you really should sit down if you are a provider or a deployer, also a distributor or an importer of AI, and just make sure that you've got an effective AI governance program. So that's going to make sure that you have your governance structure, you've got your different officials within your organization, you're going to have some sort of committees or where they all meet and exchange with each other. You're going to have to determine your own principles and policies around making sure your AI is aiming to be transparent, fair, privacy respecting. So you probably want to build some privacy by design in also. I'm not talking even here about the GDPR and the privacy issues. If you go back to Bart's question about what do you do with the doctors who are photographing the EHR and using ChatGPT to help them analyze what's going on, that data has just then gone straight into the database used by the algorithms, and it's no longer private, right? That can now surface in different ways. So there are compliance, you need to build your commitments to privacy in there as well. Documentation processes. These are all things which ordinarily you would want to do as a good organization, right? But now you really are going to need to. Set up a proper risk assessment framework. Now, I think one of the interesting things about the risk-oriented regulatory framework is the old kind of notion of regulation was, well, there's the regulator and here's the regulated, and the regulator just tells you what you got to do. You know, this is the level of contaminants you're allowed in your output, or this is how the level of cleanliness you must have in your restaurant, or whatever it might be. A risk-oriented system here is trying to distribute the responsibility for the thinking process around regulation downwards from the authorities, who just don't know everything. In fact, they know far less, right? But distributing that down, making responsible those who are actually developing and using the products, so that the real obligation, the core obligation, really is to assess what you're doing, who's at risk, how big is the risk, how serious is it, what can we do to mitigate it, and how do we record that process of going through that assessment. This is a real risk-based system. That's what it's about. It's about making those who are doing it responsible for almost for the regulation themselves, right? You can't just say, yes, I complied or I didn't comply. The worst thing to get to here is a kind of conclusion that you tick the box. No, you want to embed into your organization this sort of approach. Carry out ethics maturity assessment just to see how well developed is your product development or your product deployment plan in building in all the different things that you want in order to make sure that you'll comply. Very, very important aspect, which is talked about too little in the regulatory context, is what happens when you deal with other parties. Everybody is contracting for something from others, and where you are relying upon them for input, AI input into your system, then you will need to figure out, as a matter of contract, you want to do due diligence on them, make sure that they're complying with all these things. You're not just buying things baked off the wall. You want to build into your contracts liabilities, responsibilities, obligations to to strengthen the overall compliance as you're going, and to be able to claim against them, to have indemnities, these kinds of legal things in your contracts. Very important to set. And just the last thing to say is, really, I think we want to not be just thinking about compliance as a burden. There's a sociologist, Ari Valder, who's written a lot about compliance in the privacy field, and there's a tendency of a lot of organizations just to be able to tick the box and to have a record that they've done something that on the papers complies. Really, especially given what's at stake in the healthcare sector in using AI, we need to build these themes, which are basically just good governance, into business practices. So there you go. Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thank you.